Back then, I truly believed that if you worked hard enough, stayed loyal enough, and endured long enough, the world would reward you with something worthy. But, as it turned out, sometimes the price of loyalty was nothing more than a belated round of applause echoing through an empty room. My name is Elena Hart. I worked at a technology company specializing in developing emotional marketing platforms for major brands. The company's name, Luminate Media, once made me so proud that every time I introduced myself, I unconsciously stood a little taller during 4 years of dedication. I not only built strategic systems for them, but also helped forge lasting relationships with their first key clients. I was part of the founding team, even though on paper, my title was simply Senior Marketing Strategist. I loved that job with a quiet yet fierce devotion. Late nights spent alone in the conference room with the soft glow of yellow lights illuminating unfinished plans. Sleepless campaign nights racing against launch deadlines. Cold cups of coffee forgotten on my desk. Unanswered texts from my mother asking if I would be home for dinner. All of it, to me, were markers of a journey worth taking. At Luminate, I believed I had found a place where real value could be built, where emotional marketing was not just a hollow slogan, but a living philosophy. We believed in understanding consumers, creating real connections instead of merely pushing sales, somehow. I became the architect behind some of our most successful campaigns. Difficult clients returned to sign new contracts. Sales figures soared thanks to ideas that once seemed reckless. I was respected by my colleagues and, at least, I thought I was valued by the board of directors. Then, like a hairline crack spreading across glass, everything began to shift. Mason Reed, a newly hired executive from a rival firm, arrived one damp Monday morning, his expensive suit, confident smile, and the way his gaze swept the room as if appraising its contents barely registered with me. At the time, I thought he would eventually blend in like everyone else. But Mason had not come to blend in. He had come to reshape. The meetings started changing subtly. The projects I led were asked to be represented. The strategies I had once deployed freely now had to pass through an additional layer of approval. Mason never criticized outright. Instead, he asked sugar-coated questions designed to make people second-guess themselves. Are you sure this approach fits the current market? I am just wondering if we might modernize our methods a little. I did everything to adapt, worked longer hours, proactively submitted alternative plans, met separately with other departments to ensure no detail was overlooked. I believed that if I could just prove my true worth, everything would be fine. Then came the biggest project of the quarter. An international brand approached Luminate, seeking a global integrated campaign. The budget was massive, enough to redefine the company's position in the market. I was assigned to lead it. A quiet acknowledgement from the leadership team. 3 months later, we had a detailed plan, a creative proposal unlike anything I had ever seen. Sleepless nights, nerve-wracking internal presentations, countless edits down to every single word. I had poured my heart into that project. On the day of the final presentation to the board, I sat at the back of the room, clutching a folder still smelling of fresh ink. But instead of me presenting, as had always been the case, Mason stepped forward, smiled confidently, and began to deliver the plan. Every slide, every idea, every nuanced phrasing down to the punctuation was mine, yet my name appeared nowhere. I sat there, hands clenched tightly beneath the table, feeling as if someone had ripped the floor out from under me. No one seemed to notice. Heads nodded, pens scribbled, hands clapped, all praising Mason for his groundbreaking strategy. I left the meeting room wearing a mechanical smile, my mind spinning. That night, Mason sent me a text. "Great job. Keep it up." Not a word of formal thanks. No acknowledgement. I tried to convince myself that perhaps I was overthinking, that maybe things would be clarified later. But then the internal news broke. Mason was promoted to Vice President of Creative Innovation, a position that had never existed before, credited largely for securing a groundbreaking international project. I stared at the announcement email, feeling as if I were silently reading my own termination notice. After that, the atmosphere at work grew unbearable. Meetings I once led now had me sitting on the sidelines taking notes. Decisions I once shaped were now made without me and only informed afterward. Mason assigned me trivial tasks, the kind once reserved for interns. One rainy afternoon, I was summoned to a private meeting. HR was there alongside Mason, both avoiding eye contact. "Elena, the company is restructuring the marketing department to align with the new strategic vision," HR began, their voice as lifeless as a memorized speech. "Unfortunately, your current role no longer fits our future direction." I did not need to hear more. I understood, betrayed, pushed out of the very home I had helped build. I walked out of the building that day, the rain pouring down as if to mock me. Lightning tore across the gray sky. In my hands, besides a now useless employee badge, there was only a cold, hollow emptiness. When I reached home, I found a small note left by my mother on the kitchen counter. "Went to the hospital for tests. Got the results. Call me." My hands trembled. I called immediately, but the line only rang busy. It was not until after midnight that my mother finally texted back. The message short and cutting through the silence. "Stage 1 cancer. Do not worry about me. Take care of yourself." I sat still in the dimly lit kitchen, my shadow stretched across the damp wall. The untouched cup of coffee sat cold on the table. Everything I had once trusted, sacrificed for, and fought to build had shattered into pieces. I had lost my job, my faith, and now faced the fear of losing my mother. Never in my life had I felt so small and invisible. The first days after the shock passed like a thick fog, smothering every sense. I woke up each morning in a dark apartment, the light sneaking through the window, gaps barely strong enough to pull me out from under the cold blanket. My phone remained silent. No messages of concern, no offers of collaboration. The feeling of betrayal seeped into every fiber of my being, eroding the trust I had so patiently built. Yet within that suffocating silence, a thought slowly took shape. If I stayed here, I would truly disappear, and that would mean they had won. One afternoon, while sorting through old files, I found a small notebook I had once used to jot down emotional marketing ideas during my early days at Luminate. The rushed handwriting, the messy hand-drawn diagrams, the notes scribbled at 2 a.m. still carried the faint smell of old ink. I flipped through each page, memories flooding back, not of failure, but of days when I still believed in the power of genuine human connection. I realized the only thing they had managed to take was a title, what truly belonged to me. They could never touch. That realization clung to me like an underground stream of life. I began planning, quietly, step by step, right there at the dining table where the cold coffee cup still sat untouched. No rush, no grand announcements. I knew I could not start over with a few hollow LinkedIn posts or complaints on social media if I wanted to exact revenge through success. It had to be done meticulously, silently, but decisively. First, I reviewed all the solid relationships I had nurtured over the past 4 years. not the ones who offered surface-level congratulations, but those who had genuinely believed in the real value I brought. I quietly sent simple messages, free of complaints, just greetings, asking how work was going. Some replied almost immediately, warm and sincere. Some remained silent, perhaps out of awkwardness, perhaps because they had already moved on. It did not matter. I only needed a few seeds to plant. A week later, I received an invitation for coffee from an old friend, Anna, who had once been a brand director at a partner company. We met at a small outdoor cafe, the late afternoon sun flickering through the trees. When I briefly shared that I was seeking a new direction, Anna tilted her head thoughtfully before softly saying, "If you are thinking about starting something of your own, I might have a project for you." And just like that, the first seed sprouted. The project was not grand, merely a rebranding campaign for a local coffee chain struggling to survive after the pandemic. The budget was tight, the expectations modest, but for me, it was a reminder that I still had value to offer. I threw myself into the work like a drowning person clinging to a life raft. Day and night, I researched, sketched strategies, built a brand story not just with data, but with genuine emotion. Emotional marketing was no longer just theory. It became a lifeline. The only way these small brands could survive in a cold, post-pandemic world every morning. I set a small discipline for myself before checking emails or phones. I had to complete at least 3 critical tasks. Every evening, before going to sleep, I had to write down at least one thing I accomplished that day, no matter how small. These little habits gradually pulled me out of the heavy shadow of broken trust. Still, not every day was easy. There were nights when I stared blankly at the screen, filled with doubt. There were moments when delayed replies from clients left me anxious, fearing they had changed their minds. There were times when I received cold, dismissive responses from connections I had once considered solid. These challenges came in waves, sudden and unrelenting, like tides battering a lone figure in the ocean. One evening, after receiving a message from Anna informing me that part of the project budget had been cut because an investor had pulled out, I felt as if the world had shoved me back into the depths once more. I sat frozen by the window, watching the streetlights flicker under the misty rain, one question looping endlessly in my mind: is it worth it? Then, unexpectedly, another message appeared. It was from Daniel, a former colleague at Luminate. He wrote, "Heard you left Luminate. I just left too. If you need someone to help with technical work for a project, I am in." I stared at the screen, a swell of emotion I could not name rising in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of light at the end of the tunnel. I replied immediately, and within a few days, Daniel and I were back in motion. With his support, I could expand the project, proposing additional creative ideas for the coffee chain. Not just a brand redesign, but also a social media campaign, local events, and loyalty programs rooted in emotional connection. The first customers returned. They were not merely paying for products or services. They were seeking connection, understanding, authentic values that large, cold brands no longer offered. I named my small project Embrace because I believed that in this chaotic world, what people longed for most was a sense of being embraced, of being seen, of being understood. Embrace had no grand office, no big investors backing it. It was just me, Daniel, a few trusted collaborators, and a quiet conviction that emotional marketing still had a place in this world. Every small step forward, every signed contract, every piece of positive client feedback felt like a needle stitching the torn parts of my spirit back together. I no longer fought for a dramatic comeback to prove anything to anyone. I did it first and foremost to prove to myself that I had never truly failed. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that Mason and the old company would eventually hear about Embrace, but this time I would not have to say a word. Success would tell the story on its own. There were mornings when I woke up to sunlight slipping through the cracks in the window, feeling as though everything was slowly rearranging itself into a quiet new order. Embrace, the small project that had begun with a cold cup of coffee and an unexpected message, was now taking on a clear shape. Positive feedback rippled outward like silent waves. Customers referred more customers, and for the first time in months, I felt an emotion I thought I had lost forever: trust. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a pitching session with a local restaurant chain, I received a call from Anna. Her voice was tense, almost whispering, as if afraid someone might overhear. "Elena, have you heard about Luminate?" I held my breath. "They just lost a major account. Fresh Roots." I froze. Fresh Roots had once been one of our largest clients when I was there. They had always valued emotional marketing, always demanded deep understanding rather than cold numbers. They were the reason behind many sleepless nights I had endured. Now they were gone. Anna fell silent for a moment before continuing, her voice lower. "Word is, Fresh Roots is looking for a new agency. They want a more authentic approach." I clutched the phone, my mind a tangled mess. Part of me burned with anger for the values that had once been dismissed. Another part of me saw an opportunity. That night, Daniel and I sat down and mapped out a bold plan. We decided to send a strategic proposal directly to Fresh Roots, bypassing any intermediaries, no boasting, no embellishments, only sincerity and real value. 3 days later, we received a reply. An online meeting was scheduled. When the screen lit up with the face of Fresh Roots marketing director, I saw something in his eyes that I had not seen in a long time. Genuine interest. The meeting flowed smoothly. I spoke as if it were the last chance of my life, not out of fear, but because I believed in every word I said. I talked about how emotional marketing did more than build brands. It built lasting relationships with customers. I explained how Embrace was not about selling products, but about touching hearts. When the meeting ended, I tried not to expect too much, yet only 2 days later, Fresh Roots officially invited Embrace to become their strategic partner across the entire Asia-Pacific region. The first project alone was worth 3 times the sum of all previous Embrace contracts combined. I sat still in my familiar coffee shop, the warm scent of coffee swirling around me, my mind swimming in a tide of emotions. I knew that somewhere in that cold office building, Mason and the Luminate executives were scrambling in urgent meetings. Losing Fresh Roots was no small matter. It was the first warning shot, but it did not end there. Within 2 weeks, 2 more former clients of Luminate reached out to Embrace. Each had a different reason, but centered on the same issue. They felt the service had lost its human touch. The new strategies lacked vitality, lacked emotion, lacked the subtlety they once valued. Some clients even mentioned my name, cautiously, as if afraid it might make things awkward. I did not feel vengeful triumph. Instead, I felt a strange emotion, something closer to sorrow. Sorrow for a place that had once held so much potential for good. Sorrow for people who thought they could strip away real value with shallow tricks. One morning, while reviewing the new communication plan for Fresh Roots, I received a message from one of the few former colleagues I still kept in touch with. The message was short: "Mason is in serious trouble. I did not reply immediately. I sat there, a cup of hot coffee in my hand, the sunlight dancing across the wooden table, and there was no sense of gloating in my heart, only a profound stillness, as if the universe was quietly righting its imbalances, from what I later heard. Mason was facing heavy internal criticism. The new campaigns under his leadership not only failed to drive revenue, but also triggered a silent wave of dissent among longtime employees. People who had once believed, who had once been committed, were now quietly leaving or looking for a way out. No one had any patience left for empty slogans or strategies obsessed with KPIs that forgot the human spirit. Then, the biggest twist hit. An article appeared in a renowned marketing industry magazine, analyzing the silent collapse of brands that forgot the heart of the consumer. The article did not name any company outright, but anyone in the industry knew it was about Luminate. The article emphasized the importance of emotional marketing in maintaining loyal customer relationships and condemned companies that sacrifice trust for short-term gains. I read the article in silence, my finger slowly scrolling across the screen. At the end of the piece, there was a short line that made my heart tighten. Employees who poured their hearts into their work deserve more than to be treated with disdain. It might have been a coincidence, but I knew that, somewhere, the quiet ripples of my story had found their way into the world, unstoppable. A week later, Fresh Roots officially held a press conference to launch their new campaign, with Embrace as the lead creative agency. I stood at the back of the room, watching the slides flash across the giant screen, watching the eager faces in the crowd, my heart as light as a cloud. No one in that room knew about the long nights, the silent tears I had swallowed in defeat. They only saw the results. They saw a new name emerge, quiet but solid. This was what it meant to take revenge through success. No shouting, no proving, just doing the work silently and letting success speak. As I stepped out of the conference hall, my phone vibrated. A new email from another major potential client appeared. Its content simple and direct. "We want to hear your story." I smiled softly. Never before had the words, "a triumphant comeback," carried so much meaning. That morning, when I pushed open the door to the small office we called Embrace headquarters, sunlight flooded the room like a silent signal that everything was changing. There was no longer the heavy feeling that had clung to me through the previous months. Instead, there was calm, a quiet certainty, as if I had finally crossed the threshold of doubt and pain. Embrace was no longer a vague idea born out of failure. It had become a living entity, breathing, with a soul, and most importantly, with faith. Daniel was already waiting inside. He smiled when he saw me and waved his phone in the air. "Good news," he said. "A multinational corporation just sent an invitation to pitch for their new branding campaign. They specifically requested Embrace to participate." I looked at him, half believing, half doubting. That corporation had long been a loyal partner of Luminate. For them to reach out to Embrace was almost a public declaration that their trust in the old company was gone. We sat down together, dissecting every detail of the brief, analyzing every need, every pain point they wanted to address. There were no heavy meetings filled with hidden agendas, no office politics, only pure focus on creating real value for the client. Every line of strategy written, every concept sketched, was imbued with the spirit of emotional marketing that Daniel and I had nurtured together while working. I realized that the old wounds no longer haunted me as they once did. They were no longer chains, but had become a new layer of skin, thicker, more resilient. I was no longer working to prove my worth to anyone. I was working because I knew exactly where my true value lay. That afternoon, when we sent the proposal, I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time in a long while, allowed myself to truly smile. There was no tension, no fear, no matter the outcome. I knew I had poured all my heart and soul into this project. 3 days later, a surprise video call with the corporation's CEO was scheduled. When the screen lit up, I saw an elderly man with silver hair, his eyes stern yet warm. "We have reviewed Embrace's proposal carefully," he began with a calm voice. "And honestly, it is what we have been searching for over the past 2 years. He paused for a beat, looking straight at me through the screen. "We choose you." I sat frozen across the table. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to steady himself. A multi-million-dollar contract, an opportunity that just months ago had seemed too distant to even dream about. Now, it was within our grasp. It was not just a business victory. It was validation for everything I had once believed in but had been dismissed. A proof that sometimes revenge through success does not need to be loud. It only needs patience and unwavering belief in one's true values. That night, after Daniel left, I stayed behind alone in the office. I played soft jazz, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat by the window, looking down at the city lights flickering below. Memories of the old company, of those endless working nights, of silent betrayals, drifted through my mind like scenes from an old film. At times, I thought, if Mason had never stolen my credit, if the old company had never cast me out into the cold, perhaps I would still be there, tirelessly devoting myself to a system that never truly saw me. Thinking that way, I felt a strange gratitude for the pain I had endured. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I realized it was from a former employee at Luminate. The message was simple, but weighed heavily in my heart. "Mason is about to be fired." I did not reply. I did not need to do anything. I simply set the phone down, took a sip of wine, and felt a lightness spreading through my chest. The next day, an email arrived from the organizers of an international marketing conference. They were inviting me to speak on the topic, Emotional Marketing in the Digital Era, a subject that only months ago had been mocked in the cold conference rooms of the old company. I sat in front of the screen for a long time, fingers hovering lightly over the keyboard without typing a word. I thought about the days when I had been belittled, about the ideas dismissed without a second glance, about the efforts ignored. I thought about my mother's gaze, about her brief yet powerful messages when I was at my lowest. I thought about Embrace, about Daniel, about the first clients who had trusted a name not yet even printed on a business card. Finally, I typed a simple response. "It would be an honor to participate. Thank you for seeing me." That night, I could not sleep, not out of anxiety, but from a strange excitement, as if life was unfolding a brand new path before me, a path where I no longer needed to bow my head and ask for permission to walk. It was the moment I realized I was ready to return, not as an employee seeking validation from others, but as a leader holding the reins of my own destiny. The following day, I signed the contract with the multinational corporation. Embrace officially expanded into the international market. On paper, it was just a commercial agreement, but in my heart, it was a certificate of the journey of perseverance, of true values, of a faith that had once been shattered, but now reclaimed stronger than ever. Those who had once pushed me into the darkness were perhaps now wondering how I had managed such a spectacular comeback. But I had no need to answer them. I only needed to keep walking my own path. Quietly but steadily, in the gentle morning light of that day, I understood something profound. Revenge through success is not about causing others pain. It is about ensuring that you are no longer hurt, and that is the true victory. There is something strange that happens when you walk through the fiercest storms of life. It is a profound sense of calm in the face of things that once made you tremble. On the first morning after signing the largest international contract in Embrace's young history, I still sat in the same familiar cafe, a steaming latte before me, my laptop open with a long list of emails waiting for replies. Yet inside, there were no longer waves of anxiety or pressure. I worked with a gentle focus, as if I had finally found the natural current of my own life. The news of Mason's dismissal from Luminate reached me like a distant echo, stirring none of the triumph I had once imagined I would feel. According to some old friends, his departure was not dramatic. A short internal email announced a personnel transition, a half-hearted farewell party attended by a handful of reluctant people, and then he faded into oblivion. Luminate itself struggled not only because of the loss of major contracts, but also because of a silent exodus of key employees, the very backbone of the company, those who had once believed in a shared dream before it was shattered by personal ambition. I did not need to do anything. I did not need to expose anyone or demand justice. Everything crumbled on its own, like cracked glass, needing only the slightest touch to shatter. An embrace, once just a whispered name born in a dark kitchen, was now echoing across marketing forums as a new phenomenon, a testament to the power of emotional marketing and the strength of building true relationships between brands and people. We received a steady flow of collaboration requests from businesses large and small, companies yearning to rediscover their soul after years of chasing numbers. I began spending more time building the team, not just recruiting those with skills, but those with hearts sensitive enough to feel what customers could not always put into words. Daniel and I set new working standards, where every idea, no matter how small, was heard, where creativity was nurtured rather than suffocated by cold performance metrics. One day, while reviewing applications for a new project manager position, I came across a familiar name. It was a former colleague from Luminate, someone who had once stood silently by while I was pushed aside, now seeking a fresh opportunity after the old company's collapse. I sat quietly, looking at that resume for a long time, feeling a vague sadness seep into my heart. It was not bitterness, but a sorrow for what could have been. If only more people had chosen to stand for what was right instead of staying silent for safety. I did not judge anyone. Everyone carries their own fears, their own reasons for silence or retreat. I simply placed the application into the pending group, neither rushing to accept nor discarding it. If they truly wanted to start again, the door would always be open, but this time there would be no room for compromising the values I had fought so hard to protect. When I stood on the stage of the international conference, the soft yellow lights illuminated a reflection of myself in a distant mirror at the back of the room, no longer the shadow shrinking behind others' names, but a woman who was confident, composed, and knew who she was and what she wanted. I told the story of Embrace not with grandiose words, but through small, vivid moments that only those who had walked a similar path could truly understand. I spoke about how emotional marketing was not a gimmick, but a commitment to listen, how building lasting relationships required honesty and patience, how trust, once lost, was difficult to rebuild, but when nurtured, became the most priceless asset a brand could hold. I spoke of failure, of betrayal, of lonely nights spent wrestling with fear and doubt, but I also spoke of perseverance, of refusing to let a few terrible people define my worth. When the presentation ended, there was a long, heavy silence before the room erupted into sustained applause. In that moment, I knew I had truly made my comeback, not through loud revenge, but through quiet strength, by letting results speak for themselves. That evening, returning to the office, I sat alone, opening my laptop to a flood of congratulatory emails. Among them, tucked between dozens of messages, was one from Mason. It contained only one sentence. "Congratulations, Elena. You always deserved it." I sat staring at those words for a long time, emotions drifting past like a light breeze. No anger, no triumph, only a deep, quiet sadness for what once was and for what could never be again. I did not reply, not out of pride, but because some apologies, some acknowledgments, come too late to carry any real meaning. The next day, Embrace held a small gathering for the whole team. There was no grand stage, no fireworks, just a warm evening filled with stories, laughter, and eyes shining with trust. I looked around the small room, where every brick seemed to hold the sweat and dreams of the entire team, and felt a surge of emotion that words could barely contain. Perhaps this was not the highest peak, but it was surely the most genuine place I had ever stood. When night fell, I stepped out onto the balcony, the cool breeze lifting my hair. I thought about the journey I had taken, about the losses and the costly lessons, and I realized that true revenge through success was never about crushing someone under your feet. It was about standing tall without needing them. It was about walking forward without carrying resentment. It was about rebuilding from ruins and making something even more beautiful than before, because in the end, true victory is not about making others regret losing you. It is about reaching a place where you no longer regret anything at all,